it just also to me makes me pause and wonder if when people like Naomi come out with this mental health disclaimer and she's at that level and has that many resources, what are we how are we ever going to reach down and help the people that are on the street, that are homeless, that are really schizophrenic and have mental health issues, that can't even function? Like, how do we be able to support both sides of these types of mental health issues? Because she's getting a ton of publicity and a ton of media from this, but we never talk about the homeless like this. And there's a whole bunch more, and they can't afford to make comments like that, right? And so it's
Yeah.
like, it's such a dichotomy when, and there's so many varying degrees of mental health problems that I find it uncomfortable to jump into Naomi's world when there's all these other people that are really suffering. It's hard to wrap your head around. I'm not saying she's not having a mental health problem or a breakdown. And I'm not saying I can't judge her, and I don't know what she's, I don't walk in her shoes. But when you see this, it's really hard for people to reconcile.
Welcome, GrayMatter leaders, to our unpublished podcast for GMC. I'm so delighted you've chosen to tune in and invest some of your time with us today to engage in a conversation definitely intended to move you into the leading edge of your life and business as a leader. Here at GrayMatter, we believe you have the power to activate the part of your brain scientifically known as the gray matter. And in so doing, you can take yourself out of autopilot thinking and behavior. Now, in case you're wondering, my name is Jeanette, and as always, I'm the head of sales and communication here at GMC and your host for today's leadership conversation. Today, we are talking about mental health. And guess what? I'm joined by my co host and founder of GMC, BJ Gray, who's going to share her insights on this very hot button topic. We're going to answer questions like, what is the difference between mental health, serious mental health, and mind chatter? And why has mental health become such a common problem? What has changed? Is it that modern life is just harder, or is it that our mind chatter and the stories we tell ourselves become a little too much for us? So, BJ, are you here? Are you ready?
I'm so ready because this is such a relevant conversation that's happening all over the world right now. And it may be because we're on the heels of this pandemic and people are feeling fragile. It may be because life is just giving us too much time to think. Like, I really want to talk about why mental health is becoming a huge conversation, why people are claiming they have mental health issues more and more, and why we are so sensitive to all of it. And do we need to just pause and challenge ourselves a little bit before we play the mental health card? I am not saying I don't believe people for the struggles they're having, for the chemical imbalance they might have, for the hardship they might be going through. I am not judging anybody who's feeling mentally unstable, but I do want to offer another way to pressure test your mental health claim. Because if we don't have a conversation that challenges us a little bit, we're going to become too sensitive as a society. And we're going to have too many pauses to deal with our emotions. And I want the society to be more stoic, more resilient, because a lot of high functioning people can overcome the mental chatter and not turn to a mental health excuse if they want to take the time to learn how to like examine their brain and not go on autopilot like you said in the introduction. And so this is what I really want to like sort of raise the awareness about right now. I know it's controversial to kind of go against the grain,
Mhm.
but I
I was
think
gonna
it's
say
but I'm not
that's like our
trying to
disclaimer.
deny
Don't
anybody their
hate on
space.
us. Just stay with us until the end. Don't
Yeah,
hate.
stay with us
Because it
until
is
the
an
end.
open conversation, isn't it? And we're just trying to present ideas that perhaps are like you said, a bit too sensitive and everyone is just dancing around them, but we're not claiming that we have the answers. We're just asking the questions, right?
Yeah, we're just asking the questions. If mind chatter in the 21st century has become so relevant that we are now getting so overwhelmed by the mind chatter that we're now turning and labeling it mental health issues, right?
Yeah.
And I think mind chatter has been so prevalent, because I believe society is easier to live in nowadays than it was back before technology. I was using this
Oh.
example of when we used to drive in the car somewhere and we didn't know where we were going, we would have to get a map
Mhm.
out, map where we were going, or
Yeah.
write down the instructions and then follow them. We never had an app that just did it for us in 10 seconds. And so with that extra time, we have more time to think about other things. We used to go to a dictionary to look up a word. Now we go to our phone. We used to go to an encyclopedia to find something interesting about. Now we go to our phone. There's so much more space in our time for us to think versus looking up and doing, that I believe we've entered into this area of like overthinking everything. And then we feel
Hmm.
like like you said earlier, we're demonizing this thinking that we're having, making us feel like we're bad, or we shouldn't feel bad, or
Yeah.
this is hard, so I have a mental health problem about it. I don't want to do it. And I'm just challenging us to like peel back a layer of your own awareness about why you feel the way you do and why you think you might have a mental health problem, and compare it to more of a mental chatter that you just feel very overwhelmed by.
Hmm. Okay, so that's pretty cool. What essentially what you're saying is life is easier now, not harder. And yet it kind of feels like it's harder and faster, but you actually think it's easier.
Mm-hmm.
And when you said that, I was just thinking about something I learned from Jim Quick. He's a brain coach,
Mm-hmm.
and he said in a reading class that the the problem that many of us have when we think, oh, we're not fast readers or we're not good readers, is that we read too slow. And what happens to the brain is if you read very slowly, your brain naturally starts to think of doing 5, 10 other things. It starts to wander because it's taking you so long to go through the page, to go through the words. And he kind of gave the example of like a Formula One driver. When that guy is driving, it's the only thing he can focus on. And his
Mm-hmm.
mind has to be so sharp. And in that moment, he is not thinking about his wife or vacation or debt or any of the gazillion things that we like to think about. He's only thinking about that moment and, moving that car. And if we start reading with that same kind of intention and urgency, we will actually read faster and we will be able to comprehend everything that we read. So
Hmm.
I kind of feel like you're saying the same thing because you're essentially saying, because we don't get to sit and write a letter by hand and then go find a stamp and post it in the post office box, and take out a map and figure out how to get to from point A to point B. We actually have way more time than we think, and in that time how we use it could be the reason why we end up feeling like something is wrong with us, especially if we mismanage the thoughts that we're having. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Exactly. We have more time to create stories, more time to think about happiness or not being happy. And um, that chatter gets confused with maybe something's wrong with me. Maybe I have a mental health issue. And I just think we're more sensitive in modern society because we have more time to think. And we're interpreting that sensitivity as a mental health issue. In some cases, I'm not disagreeing with people if it's real for them. I can't
Mhm.
judge you. I don't know what space you're in. I'm just challenging people to think and pressure test what they're really feeling against claiming a mental health issue first.
So, what would be the difference between a real mental health problem and just unruly mind chatter? Like, how can we start to tell the difference?
Well, I feel like a real mental health problem means you can't function. You're can't get out of
Like in
bed.
society?
Yeah, you
Oh,
can't
okay.
function. You're have maybe it's high anxiety, although I feel like high anxiety is still an over chattered brain, but maybe there's, you're doing harmful things to yourself. You have addictions. You're schizophrenic. Like, I think there's varying degrees of mental health, but there's definitely, like, I'm a coach, right? I will not coach anybody who's not functioning. I think non-functioning people need to see a doctor and need to go to a therapist. I only coach people who are functioning, but I do see a lot of people that are very high functioning, successful, top athletes, whatever you want to call it, that can manage to get through really tough days and run businesses, and then they'll claim that they're mentally unhealthy, and I'm like, are you, or are you just overwhelmed by the chatter in your brain? You know what I mean? Like, that's where I feel like maybe if you just had some new skills to deal with that chatter, or were more aware of it, we could move you forward and you wouldn't have to be as sensitive, and you would gain some resilience in those difficult moments, right? So it's that fine line between really functioning people who think something's wrong, versus, and then who's not functioning and really needs serious support.
And we're seeing this a lot with celebrities and professional athletes. I mean,
And workers and employees
and workers and employees. But there are also the people that no one talks about. Like you mentioned this, like the people who are actually really suffering. And I guess what I'm trying to understand is so let's take an example of, say, you're an employer and you have employees who say they have mental health. How in the world do you deal with that? Do you just tell them, okay, take the day off or the week off or the month off, or do you sit and try to have a conversation with them? Because it's I think it's really hard for bosses to figure out when someone plays the mental health card, what's next.
Well, I think that you need to say you probably need to take some time off and see a doctor. You cannot help, you can't try to like give them advice at that moment. I think then you need to say, if it's this bad, why don't you take some time off of work, take a leave, and go get some, support from a professional. And if they say, no, it's not that bad, it's just, my work is really hard, or like there's a lot of things on my plate. See, and then I'm like, well, that's the mental chatter. Why is it hard for you to deal with all these things on your plate? Do you feel like you're not good enough? Do you feel like you're going to fail? Do you feel like, do you feel like you're being judged? Do you feel like you're not giving the opportunities? Like, there's a lot of things you can unpack there where someone might want to pull I'm just not mentally, fit or healthy for this. I can't do this part of my job, or I can't do this. I would say to them, then go see a doctor. And if they say no, then I'm like, okay, then we got to talk about this. You probably can get through this difficult time at the job,
Given how sensitive it is, I think we kind of need to give ourselves permission to even talk about it. But how do we start? Given you just said, we've become overly sensitive as a society. How do we fix that so we can even have conversations like this?
I think that's a good question. I think we have to be open to hearing points of view like what I'm sharing, because if you were to attack me right away and not give my point of view an ounce of time, an ounce of airtime, and we just want to like jump on the bandwagon, then we're not going to have a balanced conversation about it. And I think the part that gets really hard, Jeanette, is that people wrap all of this into other issues like equality and belonging, or I guess it would be more like something that's going on in society. They tend to want to like start to wrap their situation into the problems that are happening on a larger scale. And that's where you start to get real, like a Me Too moment or something, right? A woman's rights movement or something. And that's where people then just back off and don't want to have the conversation. They don't want to pressure test because they're like, oh, great. If this person's going to tie it to some bigger social impact issue, then we can't talk about it. So I think there's also got to be this fair conversation. Like, it's just like we're letting people jump on too many bandwagons and then we don't touch it. And I just want to say, it's not doing our society any favors by being this afraid to bring up a conversation, to have another point of view. We're not, if we all just jump into the pool with anybody who claims anything and backs them up, then we're all just, we don't have a balanced society.
We're
And
not really evolving or growing.
no, we're going way backwards. And I just don't think it's as bad. I know this is going to be controversial, but I just don't think it's as bad as we make it be. We overdo everything. We demonize, like you said, everything that we think. We create this drama around everything. And I just don't, we're not dying, people. We're okay. It's just our brain is thinking about things differently.
You mentioned something about the whole science of well-being, and why people are taking that is probably because they think something is wrong with them, that they're supposed to be happy all the time. And is that because the brain is supposed to be happy all the time, or is the brain actually created to experience both the happiness and times of no happiness?
I think that people have this belief that they're supposed to be happy all the time. And in reality, we really aren't happy all the time. We're not happy when our teams are losing. We're not happy when we hit traffic going to the grocery store. We're not happy when we get a C on our report card. So we're not happy all the time, but they think that they're supposed to be, and they compare themselves to other people. They fear of missing out, fear of not being good enough, rich enough, whatever it might be. And that creates this thing like, oh my God, why am I not happy? What's the science to being happy all the time? I need to be happy. And so this class at Yale, that's The Science of Well-Being by Lauren Santos, is so popular now because I think people think they're supposed to come up with a framework to be happy all the time. And it's a misconception.
Wouldn't that help increase the mind chatter and therefore the mental health issue altogether?
Well, I think her class, which I've taken, gives you points of reference to become happier, like gratitude, meditation. It gives you tools to become happier. But what I want to offer people is, it's okay if you're not happy. You're not going to die. It's just a bad feeling. I just want to simplify it a little bit. And yes, gratitude helps to switch the mind to something more positive, and meditation calms the mind. And a run, raises your endorphins. Exercise helps. But I want to offer people not to be so afraid of the part of your life that isn't always happy. It's okay if you're not happy every moment of the day. Nothing's wrong with you. You don't have a mental health issue. You're not failing. We just create all this stuff in our head, these thoughts, these stories that makes us feel like something is wrong. And I just want people who are starting to get on this bandwagon to just challenge themselves for a second. Don't go down that path if it's really not, if you're able to function. Build some other skills, build some mental fitness, build some tools.
I think that's perfect. That's like, there's nothing more to add. Thank you so much for having this conversation. I hope we can have more on this sensitive topic.
Yes, me too. Thanks, Jeanette. And people, please remain open with my point of view. It's not to judge or deny that you're having a personal problem or a mental health problem. It's just to raise a different topic, a different way of thinking about it.